Okay, welcome everybody. So it's just giving a little bit of time for everybody to join in, but I think we will go ahead and get started. So we have two very busy ladies today who have agreed to host this webinar. And so we will be ending today around 12:50, just to let everyone know for their scheduling purposes. But my name is Bridget Jones. I am co-PI of Spectre, which is part of the Idea States Pediatric Clinical Trial Network funded by the NIH. And so this is our last webinar in a series that we've been able to run over the past several weeks, focused on mentorship and sponsorship for researchers that are from underrepresented backgrounds. So today, this last webinar will focus not only on the mentees and mentors, but the environments that you need to sustain recruitment and retention for those underrepresented in research. So I'm happy to welcome Michelle Wimes, who's our host today, who is attorney by training, but we brought her over to the dark side of medicine. So she is the Chief Equity Inclusion Officer at Children's Mercy. So I'm so happy that she's agreed to host our session today. I will let everyone know that there is closed caption capability available today on Zoom. So if you look down in the bottom of your screen, there should be an icon there that you can click on that and access that if needed. So with that, I will turn it over to Michelle.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Jones, and good afternoon, everyone. As Dr. Jones said, my name is Michelle Wimes, and I'm the Senior Vice President and Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer here at Children's Mercy Hospital, about ready to celebrate my second year anniversary next week. I am so pleased to have the pleasure to be here today to host this fireside chat with Dr. Geraldine McGee, who is the Vice Chancellor of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at KU Medical Center. She is also a nurse and a clinical associate professor at KU School of Nursing as well. And the format of today's webinar, Geraldine and I discussed that we did not want to kill you by death by PowerPoint.
Right.
So instead, we wanted to have just an interactive dialogue today on our topic, and our topic is we're going to be talking about belonging, particularly creating environments of belonging to foster recruitment and retention. And so with that, we also want to, we're striving today too to leave you with some concrete, specific action items that you can take and perhaps implement in your own institutions, whether that's an academic research institution, whether that is a hospital institution. And so we'll leave about 10 minutes at the end for any questions that you guys might have, or any other comments that you'd like to get our to have us respond to. So with that, Geraldine, I'm going to go ahead and kick it off. And our first question today, welcome. Our first question today is, what does belonging mean to you? What does it really mean?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I do thank you, Michelle, for hosting, and thank you, Spectre and Bridget and Christina, for everything you've done and for inviting me and for considering me and Michelle for this session. And it was so funny when Bridget said who can host, and when she mentioned Michelle, I was like, yes. So it's so great to be here with you, my dear colleague. So what does belonging mean? Michelle, I think that's a really good question and a great way to get us started, because when I think about belonging, I immediately think about inclusion, right? I really don't think that we can separate the two. Inclusion is the idea, as we've heard so many times, of feeling respected, valued, and heard. And it is, all of those things are a very necessary state of being when we think about belonging. So it is foundational for one to feel like they belong. And so inclusion is more actually than about just making sure everyone feels good, or that members of historically excluded groups are included. I learned actually from Dr. Lisa Nishi that the most ideal state of inclusion happens when people feel like they are an insider, like they're in the know, so that they really experience that feeling of belonging within their organization when they feel like they're in the know and when they are an insider. And when people actually need to when I think about it, see themselves in the organization. So it's how are we represented? So in saying that, we think about it so that representation is actually key as well when we think about belonging. So do I see myself there? And that's a question that we should ask ourselves, but also from an organizational perspective, should we be, we should be asking that. So, people who feel a sense of belonging actually feel like their individuality and their uniqueness is valued. So that's also key. So getting back to your question. So when I think about it holistically, with everything that I've talked about, belonging really means that there are three critical aspects to it. There's strong values around interpersonal understanding. So do we believe that we need to understand each other, and are we striving? Is there a strong strive for really understanding one another? And two, one feels that their perspective matters and their thoughts and things are integrated and that they are a source of insight. Ask yourself right now, if you are a source of insight in an organization, do you feel like you belong there? Okay. And that they see themselves there. So those are the three things that I think about when we think about belonging and what does it really mean? One, strong values around interpersonal understanding. Are we striving to understand one another? Do I see myself there in the organization? And does my perspective matter? And is it integrated in the organization? So those are my thoughts, and I hope that helps to answer your question, Ms. Michelle.
Yeah, I love that. And I just want to react to that because when I think about, belonging, I agree with you. It has to go hand in hand with inclusion. And that means that we necessarily have to embrace all of the different perspectives that people are bringing into the environment, and that's the different aspects of themselves that they're bringing into the environment. And it makes me think about intersectionality, right? And
Yes, absolutely.
about the fact that I am a complicated person. I am not just a Black female that you see on the screen here. I am Catholic. I am married. I am a parent. I have 3 children. I'm a former lawyer. There's all of these things that go into, are my insights being taken and listened to and heard and being leveraged not only for the institution, but also for my own personal growth as well, right? And so it's really looking at that person holistically and really listening to the insights that they have to bring to the table. So my next question for you is, how do we make belonging actionable in our institutions, and who's responsible for that? Like, who's responsible for belonging?
Right. So that's another great question. And you know what?
Is it me? Is it you? Is it just us as the chief diversity officers? Is it just us?
So I'm gonna code switch, girl. No, it is. It is not us. And please forgive the sirens behind me, but you all know where I am, where most of us are in health centers. But considering what we know about belonging, Michelle, that people want to feel, and I'm going to say this again, respected, valued, a valued member of the in-group, and heard, that my thoughts are integrated and seeing themselves there. So the actionable items, what you hear, all of that, are included but not limited to many things. And please, when you hear these ideas, consider your organization and what's really necessary for you to do now. What are priority items for you? Also think about what I didn't say, and I know Michelle is going to add some things too, but when we think about it at the individual and organizational levels, we think about people belonging. So affinity groups or employee resource groups, addressing microaggressions when they happen in the organization, responsibility and accountability for one's self to learn or to unlearn and relearn the things that we need to know. Because remember, many of us have had implicit or unconscious bias that brain is malleable, which means that we can unlearn and relearn some things. So it's really important to because we've all grown up a certain way. We've all had our lived experiences. We've been conditioned. Things have been ingrained in us, but there are some things that we have to unlearn and relearn, because I've had to do that over the last 3 years. So I know that at KU Medical Center, we have several affinity groups. We have a faculty of color affinity group that's called Focus. We have international students and professionals interconnected in research and education, that's Inspire. We have the KUMC allyship group, that is for anyone who wants to join that group and support other marginalized groups, actually. We also have PRISM, which is the LGBTQIA+ group. And we have residents in student empowerment, and that's RISE. And then we also have WITty, which is Women in Technology. So those are some of the groups that we have, affinity groups that we have. But regarding whom is responsible, so let's think about that. And my response, Michelle, is who is responsible? Everyone. leaders, staff, faculty, learners, everyone. And leaders must set the tone and expectations and hold themselves and their direct reports responsible and accountable. So when I say leaders, it's every leader in the organization, from executive leadership on. And when I say that, it depends on how you look at leadership, whether that's on, down, or up the chain, how you look at leadership, because many of us see leadership differently. But I would say, Michelle, that it's everyone. And to take it a step further, okay, people, all of us need to be active and take a responsibility for who we are, but also take responsibility for creating that space of belonging. So take an active role in creating that space for your peers and for yourself. So it may mean that you need to speak up, or if you see a peer who, is, he or she or they are by themselves a lot, talk to that person, pull them to the side. Maybe they don't feel like an insider. Maybe they don't feel like they belong. And so that's how we can hold ourselves accountable and take an active role in creating that belonging space. So again, I think it's everybody. Another way we can do it, Michelle, is by raising the collective consciousness of the campus community through ongoing communication, education, training, and awareness programs. And also assess the impact of those programs. So if you have a program, educational program, are we seeing a change in behavior or in mindset? That immediately makes me think about climate studies in organizations. So do you, as an organization, if you're raising the collective consciousness, how are you doing that? So is it through unconscious bias training, safe zone training? Do you have educational series? Do you have cultural competency or humility training? Do you have community conversations where you're able to come and have a brave space where you can have conversations? Do you have assemblies, symposiums, and heritage months where you can learn about different cultures and celebrate the cultures of everyone on your campus? So those are, Michelle, just some, a very short list of ideas that we can do to really, those actionable items around creating belonging in an institution. So there are many ways to do it, but we have to take an active role. And then who is responsible? Everyone. And I'm going to get to a little bit later. I know we're going to talk about this. What are leaders' responsibility? Because we are not off the hook as it relates to creating that space of belonging.
Exactly. You said so much there that was so rich. What I really loved was this raising of the collective consciousness, right?
Yes.
And everybody's individual role in participating in that raising of collective consciousness, and that it's everybody's responsibility. You talked a little bit about employee resource groups, and I think employee resource groups are a way that we can build allyship, right? That we can have that individual responsibility, build allyship with other like-minded people, and then even build allyship in our ERGs. You don't have to share that affinity in order to be able to join the group, right? So we have 5 different groups, and we've got an LGBT group, a religious group, African-American group, Hispanic group, and we've just launched an accessibility group. And you don't have to have accessibility challenges to be able to join the group and be an ally. It's interesting because at Children's Mercy, we are going through right now a culture shaping process, right? Where we're talking about culture, talking about the need to change culture. And one of the things that we talk a lot about is the fact that culture is created and built through common language and through stories, right? And so you talked a little bit about that too, educating yourself. And that involves having a common language to talk about belonging, to talk about inclusion. What do these terms mean? Because they go a long way toward building that collective consciousness, as you talked about. So I love all of those examples that you give. I wanted to share just one thing that we're doing at Children's Mercy to help build that collective consciousness. Is we've recently had some training that, you talked about training in education. We had some training on cross-cultural communication and cross-cultural conflict resolution with our staff. We trained about 340 staff in that. Yeah, our emergency department, our security department, and our social work department, because again, raising that collective consciousness, having people take individual responsibility for what is my part, and not tolerating people, but creating a culture of inclusion where people belong and feel like they can bring their whole selves to the table.
Yes,
So
before we move on, I want to underscore, Michelle, something really important that you said about the shared language, that common, it's so important. And so I just wanted to underscore that for myself and for everyone in here about that shared language, because it is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so the next question that I have for you is, how does recruitment factor into belonging? Like, what's the tie-in there?
Yeah, so recruitment. So with recruitment, again, representation matters. Do you see yourself there in the organization? So when we think about belonging, do I belong there? Okay, so am I there? Do people who look like me, or think about those mutable and immutable characteristics that we share. So seeing yourself there in the organization, there is a sense of community, that there is a tribe, that's how that belonging starts to feel. Once you get there and you see that there are people there that are similar to you, so you build that sense of community around you, which is so important, that people really, that it's needed. I really feel like it's, when we, all the time we hear about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and the need to belong is key. And to create that belonging, you need people. You need people around you. And sometimes you want to be with people who share some of the same common characteristics as yourself. So in terms of recruitment, I think representation is key, and to recruit people to your organization. So I think about those mutable and immutable characteristics, related to diversity, that they are valued in the organization and included and sought after, and that they're not the only one. So if we're recruiting and we bring someone there, are they the only one that is there now? What are we bringing them to? Is a really big question. The other thing I think about in recruitment, Michelle, is how important it is to have pipeline and pathway programs for learners, and to recruit them into faculty positions. So those students who are graduating with those master's and doctoral degrees, are we recruiting them into faculty and in roles of researchers or investigators and scientists? Are we able to do that? So that's why, the recruitment is a factor in belonging, is also to have those pipeline programs. So how do you recruit? It is through pipeline and pathway programs. So the other thing I think about is, when I was just thinking about recruiting, is who's doing the recruiting?
Exactly.
Who's doing the recruiting? I think that's a great question, and what do the marketing materials look like? Do we do enough marketing about how amazing we are as a city? So Kansas City is an amazing city. I know I'm biased because I'm raised here, but I don't think Kansas City markets itself enough.
Yeah.
So I think marketing is also important. And organizations need to market, because speaking for KU Medical Center, and this is my opinion, even though I just said that I'm speaking for KU Medical Center, I think we could do a better job. And I've said this, I think we could do a better job of marketing our campus. We do some amazing things in partnership with many who are on here, Children's Mercy, and is a great partner. And so I think that we do so many great things with the programming that we have. We are one school that produces just about every healthcare professional that there is. Nurses, physicians, scientists, physical therapists, pharmacists. KU produces just about every healthcare professional that there is. Okay. And I think that's something that we need to capitalize on, and the amazing research that our campus does. We have some amazing researchers here and educators on our campus. And so with recruiting, I think, it's important to consider, what are people saying about the organization? Because people talk. So we must consider that when we are recruiting, because people may ask questions. Well, I hear this about, the campus, and that could be any organization. I connect with diversity officers across the state, and so it's not just any one organization. It is a lot of organizations, I should say. So with recruiting, I'll circle back. I think it is important to consider what we're recruiting people to, what type of climate we're recruiting them to. If they ask a person who is on our campus who has similar characteristics as them about feeling like they belong, what will that person say? So what if that person says, no, I don't feel like I belong here? because you kind of want to talk to people on the campus, should I come here? Is this a place that, where I will thrive instead of survive? Because we have to shift the mindset, all of us, from surviving to thriving.
Yeah.
And that's the goal, is to be thriving in the things that we do, and consider the package that we're offering people. What does that package look like to get people to come to campus, to Kansas City, and to our campuses, the great campuses that we have here? Because there are amazing people all over the nation and internationally that could come to the work that we do on all of the institutions that are represented here in this Zoom, and contribute to that great work.
I love a lot of what you said there, and you started out talking about representation and finding your tribe and finding your community. And you and I, when we were preparing for this call today, we talked about how it's a catch-22 sometimes.
Yes.
Recruit, right?
Yeah.
Because if you don't have underrepresented people currently on your staff and in your institution, it's going to be difficult to recruit new people to come into your institution, because they're going to ask, can I speak to the diverse or underrepresented folks? Then they're going to ask about their experiences. They're going to want to take a tour. And if first of all, I've seen situations, not here at Children's Mercy, but I've seen situations where people will have a diverse person come in, and on the interview list, there is not a single diverse professional for them to talk to. And that is a bad thing. You don't want that to happen when people are coming to your institution. So, just being prepared that, those questions are going to be asked, right? And you need to be prepared to have folks on the interview schedule who can talk about that, talk about the benefits of living in a Kansas City, talk about the benefits of working at an institution. One of the things that Dr. Jones was on this call and started it out, she actually is the creator of a committee that we have, the Faculty Trainee Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee here at Children's Mercy, which is now morphing into another name. But she started this program at Children's Mercy called Mercy Me, and it was for underrepresented fourth-year medical students, right? To bring them onto campus, to allow them to have an opportunity to meet faculty, other underrepresented faculty, and to start to build those bonds very early on, so that when they were selecting, okay, well, where do I want to go for fellowship? Where do I want to go for residency? And those types of things, they have that opportunity to say, oh my goodness, Children's Mercy is a place that I might want to come and, and actually work. So I think, just being mindful of those things, and everything, like you said, the marketing piece is so very important too. So with that, I'm going to move us from recruiting and move us to talk a little bit about retention. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on how does belonging factor into retention, and what are some of the things that go along with that?
Yeah, so we just talked about recruitment and how to get people to the organization. And so we've got some really good, solid ideas about how to recruit people, but how do we keep people? Are we retaining our faculty? So in order to retain people, there's things that we need to do, but you need mentors, you need sponsors, you need what we talked about earlier, affinity groups where people can get into those groups and feel like they belong. They need opportunities to get involved. They need resources. And that could be money, that could be people. So resources varies. People need protected time to write. New investigators may need a startup fund for a project. So do we have that money available for early investigators to support them in the work that they want to do? And I also think about being added to grants, like an early investigator being added to grant opportunities, intentionally including them in projects and programming, and invested, as an organization, I would encourage us all to think about this as organizations or institutions. Are we investing in the development and success of faculty? And if so, how are we doing that? And are those programs producing what we want them to produce? So are we getting what we want to out of those programs? So I think it's important for us to invest in our faculty, our early investigators, protect that time, add them to grants, add them to manuscripts, make sure they have mentors, make sure they have sponsors, make sure they have coaches. There are many of us who have all three. It is so necessary. So necessary. So necessary. So again, you know, we know that faculty want to feel a sense of belonging. They really, when they feel that belongingness, they feel like their individuality and their uniqueness is valued. So if you're sought after, you feel like you are valued, that your uniqueness is valued. So it's important to think about that, and how are we seeking out people. The other thing in terms of retention that I would encourage us to think about, and I don't mean to shift this way, but I think it's necessary for us to go here, is are people leaving and why? Many institutions, we've seen the great resignation across campuses, and people leave for various reasons. And I'll say this, some people need to stay and some people need to go, because not everybody needs to stay, right?
Yep.
But there's a lot of people that we want to stay. And when I think about stay, so I have and allow the stay interview. So have the stay interview and allow the stay interview. And what I mean by that, when I say have the stay interview, so as from an employee perspective, as a leader, so I'll start with this perspective first. As a leader, I would encourage us, when we're doing those, maybe those annual evaluations, check in with people to see, you know, what are they thinking about? Where, you know, are we supporting them? Sometimes you can tell, and hopefully they'll be honest with you. So have that stay interview before people, try to do that before people resign, and see how you can further support them, or what you can do to support your faculty before they resign. And it's important, it's a critical step, and you got to keep your ear to the ground so that you know what's going on, hopefully, but that your employees feel like they can have that conversation around the stay. But also from an employee perspective, allow that stay interview. It's okay if you want to go. It's okay if you've made your mind up that you want to leave. You never know what that leader is going to say in that stay interview. What if they didn't know some things? And then they need that information in order to make change. Hopefully that's what they're doing to make change in the organization. Because if they hear those things, then they're like, okay, mental note, and this is something that we as an organization need to do better, or I as an individual needs to do better. So again, the stay interview, and that would be, I would say that responsibility is on the employee and the organization to do that stay interview. And I don't have like the mechanism, excuse me, on how to do that stay interview. But I think that stay interview is important. So I say have the stay interview from a leader's perspective, and allow it from an employee perspective. Even if you've got your mind made up and they say, hey, how can I talk you into staying? What would we need to do to keep you? That says a lot, because maybe
Sure does.
they weren't doing what they needed to do to create that sense of belonging.
Right.
And what if people just don't know? So, you know, we have that conversation where, you know, how do people not know? Okay. They don't know.
Sometimes they don't know.
People just don't know and are not aware.
Right.
You just don't know what's happening in the lives of people. Some people are just so, I don't mean to say clueless, but that is the word that I want. Unaware. It sounds better.
Yeah, that sounds better.
Okay. Some people are just unaware.
Yeah.
And I think that having grace for human beings is really important, but also having grace for organizations, because there are some things that you could say and people are like, I did not know. And if they offer you, if they want you to stay, because if you go in there and say, here's my resignation letter, if they say thank you, that says something. But
right.
if they say, you know, what can we do to keep you?
Yeah.
And I would say many times it's not just because, or gosh, it could be that you're bringing in millions and millions of dollars. It could be because of that, but I think that many people are valued, and not everyone knows how to demonstrate belonging and that you value a person, because sometimes you're so focused on what you're doing that and you're unaware of what needs to happen to create that sense of belonging. So as it relates to belonging and retention, I think that those are some things I immediately think about. You know, the
Yeah.
stay interview, and, the need for resources, faculty, mentors, sponsors, affinity groups, opportunities to get involved, resources, protected time, startup funds for projects being added to grants or manuscripts.
Mhm.
And of course, if you're added to a manuscript, you need to have a part in it, of course,
Yeah.
intentionally including them in programming, and investing in the development and success of faculty. I know that was a long-winded answer. I am
It
so
was,
sorry.
but it was so good, because what I heard you say is you got to get away from just talking to doing. You have to walk the talk, right? And
Yeah.
you have to make those investments in your people. And we're doing state interviews. We just started that this
Oh,
year.
good.
Right? Yes, at Children's Mercy. And we're trying to do them pretty regularly. Like they're asking us to do them quarterly, right? Not just annually, but really looking at those. And like you said, just trying to get ahead of issues that might pop up that you just may not even be aware of, that you may be able to stem and keep somebody from leaving the organization. And the other couple things that you said, big things, were the protected time. That is so important. We have a couple of things that I wanted to mention to the audience. At Children's Mercy, we have a new DEI Scholars Program that we've just launched, right? Where we are giving our faculty members, they receive a $75,000 grant to conduct research and to produce publishable scholarship that advances some of these evidence-based strategies around health equity and around diversity. So it literally is putting your money where your mouth is. And I tell you, when we announced this DEI Scholars Program, the faculty was just blown away. Like, you're giving us grants to do the kind of work that's really going to make an impact in the lives of underrepresented community. The other thing is DEI champions. So we're going to have about 8 to 10 faculty champions that will have 10% of their time protected in order to be able to help us in this culture shaping journey that we're on. And they can do, they're going to be responsible for doing training on unconscious bias for other faculty members, right? So that's really exciting. And at the same time, we're building out what I call a Game Changers Network. And that Game Changers Network is, we want a diversity, equity, and inclusion ambassador to be represented in every single department and division at Children's Mercy. We want them to be on the ground, to be our eyes and ears, to let us know, the Office of Equity and Diversity, when you're hearing things in neonatal, you're hearing things in PICU, or you're hearing things in, in our oncology department, and we're going to train you on equitable facilitation. We're going to train you on how to have courageous and difficult conversations. And then you can bring us in secondarily, but then they can have these difficult conversations themselves and try to stem some of these issues from the very beginning. And training them on how to do this is really, really important. So those are just kind of 3 of the things that we're doing at Children's Mercy that I think speak directly to what you talked about.
Michelle, before you move on to that last question, I want to give you a really good example. Those are really great things that you talked about, and I'm pretty confident that many of the organizations represented right now are doing trying to, or have implemented things to try to retain faculty. And one of the things I think about as I hear you talking is that the School of Nursing, KU School of Nursing, supported me getting my doctoral degree. And that support included paying for me, my tuition, but also protecting my time.
Yes, yes.
And because the School of Nursing did that, when I became Vice Chancellor, I wanted to make sure that I kept time in the School of Nursing. So I still teach classes.
Yes.
That's because I'm committed to the School of Nursing. That's how they were able to retain me. That's why it was not, I wouldn't have thought differently about still teaching in the School of Nursing because of what they did. So I felt valued, I felt respected, heard. I felt that, they wanted me to stay. So I felt also a sense of, that I belong here in the School of Nursing, that sense of belonging. There's things that we can
loyalty
do.
That's
Absolutely.
too, right?
That was where the loyalty came from, is because of the investment that they made. So, and I would say that not every school or department is perfect. There are definitely opportunities for improvement around diversity in the School of Nursing, but in the nursing profession in general needs more diversity, and we're certainly working on that. And what I mean in diversity in the School of Nursing, as well as the nursing profession, is race and ethnicity, as well as men. We need more men in nursing, and we certainly been admitting more men into the School of Nursing. So I was listening to you, and I was thinking about those opportunities for faculty development, and that was one that really stood out for me. Is having my tuition paid for and protecting my time so that I could get through the program quicker and come out and be full-time faculty with a terminal degree. So it was, it certainly was very supportive. Okay, I know I'm gonna hush now.
No, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. And we have I think about 7 to 9 more minutes to talk about this last question, which is great. And then we can open it up for any questions that have come through the chat. We've talked about people's individual responsibility to contribute to belonging and how that impacts recruiting and retention. I'd like to shift and talk a little bit about organizations' tangible investments, right? Organizations that create opportunities for recruitment and retention, and what are that organization's responsibilities? And we kind of touched on both, but I want to take a little bit of a deeper dive on the organization piece.
Okay, so when I think about organizations and what they need to do to create that sense of belonging, I think the first thing that comes to mind is that the organization, its leaders must care about belonging, must care about diversity, must care about equity and inclusion, and try to avoid and or mitigate the perception that the organization and its leaders are just checking a box.
Yes.
There, I said it.
Yes. Performative, what we call performative diversity.
Performative. Yes. We must avoid that or mitigate it if at all possible. So we must really show that we care about diversity because leaders have enormous power in shaping the organizational culture and should take responsibility and accountability for that. Every leader. So I know I talked earlier about the responsibility is everybody. And so now I'm gonna hit, the leaders pretty hard, because it is the responsibility of the leaders in the organization. And so it's important for, as I think about that, for organizations to address the undercurrents that lead to riptides. So when I speak about organizational undercurrents, that is the water cooler talk. Well, let me back up. So undercurrents are invisible patterns or entanglements that create constrictions and symptoms and problems on the surface. Okay. And that came from Paul Zonefeld, I believe is his last name. And undercurrents also come from subcultures in the organization. It's a reality that is felt at that gut level. So, the undercurrent is what's that low level thing that everybody is feeling. You're talking about it at the water cooler. It's the unspoken and spoken language. And that undercurrent that runs in organizations eventually lead to a riptide. And the riptide is where it pulls people away.
Yes.
And I know that we've all been on the beach, and you have put your towel down and you have gone out into the water, and before you know it, you are far away from your towel and you don't know how you got there. That was an undercurrent pulling you away. And we know that we want to prevent that or make sure that it doesn't become a riptide. Okay, so that undercurrent kind of is slowly pulling people away. So that's immediately what I think about. So I think that the other thing about organizations and what they can do is key decision makers need to have a presence and make a commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Don't forget, though, that everyone is responsible, and we should not have anyone that is a passive recipient of inclusion or belonging. So take an active role. Don't be a passive recipient of this inclusive or belonging environment. Everybody needs to do the work. We all have to do the work. So leaders fostering and demonstrating belonging is so important. And remember that representation is key. So ask yourself, what does your leadership team look like? At the executive level, at the chair level, at the dean level, and at the associate dean, and the faculty. What does your team look like? What does that executive leadership team look like? Who is making the decisions? Also, the importance of using dashboards to show progress or no progress. We must be transparent. I think it's okay for us to try things to see if it's going to work. And if it doesn't work, we were transparent and say, hey, that didn't work. So we're going to shift and try this now. I think that says a lot about organizations, that we're transparent, but we're working on it. and using best practices. And if someone, let's say someone sees that something didn't work, and someone says, hey, here is an idea, and that person may be from a historically excluded group, and we integrate their ideas. And remember earlier, I said, when people's ideas are integrated,
Yep.
they
Absolutely.
feel like that they belong.
They belong, right?
Yeah.
And
So
so-
dashboards, yes. So, and also infrastructure is key. So adequate
Yes.
DEI
You're
staff and
speaking my
department.
language.
Oh my goodness, infrastructure is key.
Yeah.
Making sure that there is a DEIB representative or staff member in departments, in schools, that it's threaded throughout. That's how you make an impact. Because it can't just be 4 people doing the work or 5 people. It has to be department level, school level. It must be present. Okay, I'm going to hurry up. Okay, infrastructure. Also, avoid fragmented organizations. So make sure that everybody's working together, that we are addressing concerns brought forward.
Right.
So when someone brings forward a complaint, what are we doing about that complaint? I know that investigations are done, but let's look at the results of those investigations. Have we just kind of written off everyone and said that there's nothing to this?
Mhm.
How does that make people feel? And what are people saying about that if they bring up a concern and nothing was done?
Yeah.
And then intentionally, the intentionality is what I'm saying from an organization. So what is your organization pledging? What is the organization's commitment to creating a belonging environment for everybody in that organization? And if we're focusing on diversity and representation, you must have the people there who look like those individuals to create that sense of belonging. Because if I don't see not one of me who looks like me or has the mutable or immutable characteristics that I have, because we know that diversity is broad.
Mhm.
We know that it's broad. And in that diversity, that those levels of diversity, those dimensions of diversity, we know that it is very, very broad. So and Michelle, I heard you earlier talking about accessibility, which is so important. So diversity is very, very broad. We know that. And that's why I keep saying mutable and immutable characteristics. Right now, the thing that you cannot mute. So one thing that's immutable about me right now is, many of you know that I'm a Black woman. So that's immutable. I can't mute that. But there are things that you can mute that you just can't see about people. Someone may have a learning disability. That's diversity as well. And we want to make sure that we have accessibility for all. So Michelle, those are some things that come to mind when I think about what organizations should be doing to create that sense of belonging and then foster recruitment and retention.
That is fantastic. And I'm just going to highlight a couple things that you said and give a couple of examples. The shadow of a leader is what we've been talking about a lot at Children's Mercy through this new culture shaping process that we're doing. What shadow as a leader are you casting? And are you walking the talk? Do you actually, have you committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion through representation in your leadership ranks throughout your department, right? One example of what we're doing here at Children's Mercy is we partnered with the local Chamber of Commerce on this initiative called Project Lead. And we're looking specifically at our applicant pools for directors and above. And we have noted that there is an equity gap there in terms of representation, that we don't have as much representation of Black and brown people at director level and above. So we have committed with the Chamber of Commerce, and there's a pilot program that's happening with financial institutions and healthcare institutions. And so we've agreed to increase our applicant pool by 30% diversity. And so those are those commitments that you talked about that leaders can make that really will start to have a tangible difference, right? And you can say, so we're doing this pilot for staff at that director level and above, but eventually we will move that pilot and do that with faculty, right? So we're looking at our faculty ranks as well and what that diversity looks like. So I am cognizant of the fact that it's 12:45 now. This conversation has gone so quickly, and as I knew it would, because we just have so many great things to talk about. So I do want to open it up for questions, and I'm trying to get my chat up here just so I can see I see that there is one question here. How do you measure the impact or progress of your efforts in a way that avoids performative activism or doesn't feel invasive? What is on your dashboard?
Yeah, great question,
Great
Lisa.
question. Yes.
Hi, Lisa. How are you? So that's a really good question, and I think there are many ways that we can measure impact and progress. And one simple way that comes to mind immediately, Lisa, is pre and post evaluations of programming. So do people have a changed mindset or behavior compared to when we started this program or this educational opportunity? So I would say pre and post evaluations. I would say climate studies is a great way to do it. So and do that climate study every 5 years. There's also like quick assessments that you can do. One of our Wichita campus just did a DEI survey that was just great, and you can compare the data from last year or 5 years ago on those. And then when you said that efforts to rate or not to the basis, what is your dashboard?
Yeah.
What is on your dashboard? So we are actually working on a dashboard, and we want to show representation. One of it is to show representation on our campus. That is sometimes hard for some people in Kansas to come to terms with how the campus may look. But I really think painting a picture of who is on your campus and then looking at it 2 years from now and say, now who is on our campus? Mm-hmm. Have we increased the diversity of women or Black or African American? And even if you want to tease it down more, or African or Latinx community or LGBT, and I don't know if we can collect LGBTQIA or religious beliefs. I'm not really sure. Hope there's a human resource person on here who maybe can go into detail about that. But, or Michelle, you probably can too. But I think that there's ways to do it without being invasive. I think organizations, if you do it on a regular basis, which many organizations are not guilty, but it's not anybody's fault. I think we have really good intentions. I would say just about everybody does. But remember, the infrastructure is key to get those things done, and partnering with others to do it. So I would say that those are some ideas that come to mind, Lisa and Michelle. I don't know if you have further ideas as well as what you all are doing.
Yeah, I do want to add, I started here at Children's Mercy a couple of years ago, and we have created a workforce dashboard. I know one of the other questions was, it was something about, do you collect the information university-wide or is it department specific, and how is it collected? So what we did was, I hired a diversity analyst, right? And so that diversity analyst, we created this dashboard, and the dashboard had 4 years worth of static data going back to 2017, right? We haven't been able to yet, we're in the process of doing this now, tying into our HR system so that we can have the actual data currently, like the current data, and not just the past data from our affirmative action plans and things like that. But it's collected hospital-wide and department-wide. So we can go and we can look at race and gender and ethnicity, and we can look at what department they're in. Mm-hmm. We can look at, age, and we can look at what position they have. We can look at when they started, if they left. So we can start to look at attrition stats, and we can start to draw some trends. Why are people leaving? Not necessarily, won't have the why, but it'll be when did they leave, what their position was, who their supervisor was, right? So then we can start to say, okay, are we losing people from a certain department? Are we losing people from a certain division? Are we losing people in a certain demographic, whether it's race and ethnicity, whether it's gender, and then start to build out policies and practices that address those trends that are coming up through that dashboard. So we are very new in our dashboard journey as well. But I do think that the dashboards and collecting the metrics, I do think what Geraldine said too about the climate surveys, the engagement surveys, I think those are so very important in terms of metrics. Let's see, there was another question. Do you have any suggestions for how to maintain respect, privacy, belonging, and prevent retaliation in a small department where it can be difficult to do so that when complaints or issues are raised?
Gosh, that's a great question. And again, I hold leaders, I know I shouldn't do this, but I really hold leaders accountable and responsible for the tone in departments and how to create and foster that. So what is the leader role modeling in that department, and are those issues being addressed? And really communicating how important it is for us to have respect for one another in our departments. And, you know, do you have any suggestions for how to maintain respect? I think it has to be demonstrated and discussed. I don't think that we can sweep it under the rug. And if you have people in the department who, and then people want to share things. Now, many of us are mandatory reporters. So depending on what you share, we may have to report to human resource or human resources or our compliance office. But you know, you want to be able to go and have a conversation with a colleague. And so I think that's important. But privacy depends on what you're talking about. But I think that there are things that we can discuss in our departments that should be, you know, private and maybe amongst us. So I think it depends on what is the leader role modeling and communicating in the department, and what is it the expectation set in the department. And that could be that you have a one-on-one or a general meeting, setting those expectations in the meeting. So the expectations is you know, a two-way street.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and sometimes it's empowering both the staff person and the leader to have courageous conversations, because sometimes you're not going to get anything resolved unless you're willing to not keep something private, like especially if it involves a protected category, right? So if it's involving race or gender or sexual orientation, gender identity, anything like disability, anything like that, at least for us at Children's Mercy, we have a concern tracker and we track those things. If it's a protected category, it automatically gets escalated to our HR department or employee relations, right? And then we have to then, we then act as mediators, right? To say, okay, this is the situation. These are some ideas of what we think might be able to resolve this. This is what the employee has shared with us. And then we let the employee know that we have to escalate this because it is a protected category. But we're hopeful that through some of the coaching and mentoring that we can have through employee relations, a lot of times with the leaders and with the employee, that we can come up with some kind of resolution that meets the needs for the employee without sacrificing their feelings that, you know, that they don't think that anything is getting resolved, or that they feel like they don't belong, or they feel like this is not the place for me. So it's really just a combination of trying to do that in a way that keeps the leaders engaged and the staff, I think.
Yeah. And retaliation should not be,
that
needs to be reported. People, you know, many times, that's why people don't report, because they're afraid of retaliation and retribution.
Yeah.
And it needs to be, if people are feeling that way, it needs to be reported. If you're witnessing, if your colleague tells you that's what they're feeling, you can have a conversation with them and say, hey, are you okay if I say something? Say if you are confident, you know, not confident, but comfortable enough. That's what I mean in addressing it. But it should not be tolerated. That's not okay. Absolutely. And I know that it happens. We all are aware that it happens, but it doesn't make it okay. And that's when we need like a whistleblower or someone to step up and say, hold on a second here, this is not okay.
All right, I think that was our last question, Geraldine. So we're about 5 minutes to 1, and I just want to thank you for sharing your expertise today. It's been wonderful having this conversation with you on belonging and creating greater retention, creating greater recruitment in our spaces. And it's been a great conversation. Are there any final parting thoughts that you would like to share before we close?
There are. I want to say that I realize one of the things I know is that we're all trying, and we all have to continue to strive for better as a person, as a community, and as we work in our organizations. It really does take all of us. And I want to thank you all for attending, but just know that better days are coming. But to get to those better days, it takes all of us. So keep doing what you're doing. And if you're not doing something you need to be doing, do it. And if you can change something, change it. So,
Be willing
okay.
to learn and unlearn.
That's right.
Relearn. That's
That's right.
one of the things that you said that I just love.
Yep.
So thank you so much. And thank you to Spectre for hosting us today on this webinar platform. And we really appreciate being here. Dr. Jones, did you have any closing remarks that you'd like to make? No? All right. So with that, we're going to end the webinar. I hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
Bye-bye. Thank you.